Welcome to the Engage and Empower podcast. Behind every successful company is an intentional and innovative approach to empowering your most valuable asset, your people. Join me in having conversations with people and talent leaders as we share our journeys and unpack what it takes to build strong, cohesive teams and employee experiences. From executives at early-stage startups to innovators at large public companies, we'll capture the compelling stories of the people behind people teams. Hey everyone, thanks so much for tuning in to the Engage and Empower podcast. I'm your host, Rasika Rajagopalan, and today I'm really excited to be chatting with the head of HR at Entrada Therapeutics, Kerry Robert. I remember first meeting Kerry on a panel she spoke at. We connected afterwards, and from that point onwards, I've always loved catching up with her and picking her brain whenever I'm running into something that I want to talk through. So, Kerry, thank you so much for making time for the show. It's always such a pleasure chatting with you.
I'm delighted to be here.
If you wouldn't mind getting us started by giving listeners just a quick background and intro on you, as well as Entrada Therapeutics and what you're all about, that would be great.
Sure. So my career started in healthcare for a really large system here in Massachusetts. And I was there for about 7 years, primarily focused in the talent space and the organization development space. And I went from a really large organization to a really small organization, which was at the time 100, it seemed small to me, at 150 people, to grow the OD and learning capability in a tech agency. And I was there and ended up rebuilding the HR function within that organization. And from there, I industry hopped again and went to biotech, where I worked for Sage Therapeutics, building up their OD and learning capability there. And then I just started at Entrada Therapeutics 2 months ago. It seems like a lot longer. I don't know whether it's COVID or whether it's the sheer amount of fun I'm having over there, but it's been 2 months. And Entrada is an early stage biotech Series A organization. And what's interesting about what Entrada is doing, it's a platform that has the capability to influence a lot of therapeutic areas.
Nice. So you've been in the people and talent space for a number of years, obviously across, companies of very different sizes and industries. And I find everyone's story into the space is always a little different. What I find really interesting about your background, though, even going way back, is that at least in the beginning, it reminds me a lot of mine. I know you started off in academia and got your graduate degree pursuing counseling psychology, and then ultimately made the shift into the people and talent space. So we'd love to learn more about what initially drew you to counseling psychology, and then what, prompted the pivot into the HR space.
Yeah, I think the thing that brought me to counseling is the same thing that keeps me in HR, and that's human potential. Whether it's within a leader or whether it's within a team, being able to create an environment or create the circumstances for somebody to reach their potential. And when I got my degree, when you're in your 20s and you're trying to figure out what to do with life, a lot of times it's an exercise in figuring out what you don't like. And when I was in school and doing placements, I got exposed to OD work through an internship, and I did some systems work with a Massachusetts organization, and working with those teams, unpacking the systems and unpacking how the leader was impacting the team really helped me see how individuals make up a team and teams make up organizations, and how some of that work that you can apply to the individual can be applied more broadly. And so that's really what allowed me to make the transition into HR.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think what's really cool about your role and how it kind of parallels to counseling psych is you're actually able to impact so many different people at once in your organization and impact a specific part of their life, which is their work, which, has a lot to do with how we sort of find meaning and how we feel engaged and empowered in the work that we do. So that's really cool. Are there aspects of your counseling background that you find yourself or you've found yourself using in past roles or even today?
Yeah, I think one of the main things that I learned through that educational experience was that people, you are not the change agent as the therapist or as the counselor. And you are there to ask questions. You're there to create the space for people to work through whatever it is that they need to work through. And I take that same lens and approach to HR for the most part. There are some times where I have to say, no, this it can't go that way. We got to do it this way. But for the most part, I try to get curious and I try to create space for people to grow, make their own choices, and to reach their potential on their own.
Right. You want to enable people to get there rather than get in the car and kind of drive it for
Yeah,
them.
which was tremendously learned behavior for me.
Right, right. No, I feel the same way. So as you transitioned then into, you're talking about your role at this large hospital system, Partners Healthcare, and then you moved from there to a much smaller company. How did you prepare yourself and navigate the changes of working for a much smaller startup organization? And what surprised you as you made that transition?
So to answer it in short, not well. I did not prepare myself well at all. And that experience, that transition, and that period at the agency was one of the most profound learning experiences of my life. I wasn't prepared. I had never been a leader before in that capacity. I had never worked in, a tech company before. So the employee population was vastly different. I came from academic medicine. So it was essentially white men in bow ties. And I was moving towards a population that skewed much younger, that was much more, diverse and had a diverse, different set of demands and expectations. And I made a lot of mistakes, some that I am I've really had to work through for years. But those mistakes and those growing opportunities really helped me have compassion for other leaders. And also, the time I've spent working through a lot of that has really helped set me up for where I am right now.
Totally, totally. And I'm sure building something from the ground up, a skill that you've carried with you, you've still kind of stayed in the startup space, is something that gives you both an appreciation, but also like tremendous responsibility and ownership over how, you are creating this employee experience for your broader team. So how did you think through that? Like as you started in that role and as you've kind of gone through your subsequent roles, like how have you thought through kind of coming in open slate? There's so many programs to build, so many resources that you want to offer. Like, how do you systematically go through that exercise?
Yeah, that's really evolved. I mean, the time I spent in healthcare, my role was more of a consultant. So that lens in which I sort of come in to really try to do an assessment and understand what's happening, I can stay in that space for a while. And I've learned that in startup, you can't stay in that space for very long. You need action. So, in terms of how I approach it now, it's always balancing the short term transactional or tactical blocking and tackling that you have to do in HR that you cannot escape, right? You have to do a change of address, right? And I might be the head of HR, but there's one of me right now at my organization. So guess what? I'm doing the admin work, right? And that does take time. And so ensuring that you're carving out time for deep work or strategic work or your think time. And then also ensuring that you're aligning with your leadership team and your all the way up and down. One of the things that I've spent much more time on more recently is ensuring that I'm connected at all levels. I think it can be really easy, particularly as you work from home and you're involved in, set meetings where in my case I'm at the senior leadership team meetings. I need to be really cognizant about connecting with others and creating space and time in order to do that. Because those different perspectives of how people experience the workplace and experience my current organization really inform where there's pain, where there's opportunity, and also where we're killing it. and being able to make sure that we're protecting that.
Absolutely. I mean, it's kind of like taking an audit when you join a company. You really have to sort of see where people are at and what's missing, what's going well. No two organizations are the same. And so, totally agree that, that's a really important exercise.
But to that point, Rasika, like you have to be so intentional about it right now. You know what I mean? There's no fly by the water cooler, or like there's no ice cream social happening on Thursday where you can, connect with people. You have to be really deliberate about it. And I think it can be easy to get away from you.
Yeah, yeah. How have you navigated that, especially in a time where, we are all distributed and it is harder to build relationships, or it does take a level of intentionality? How have you navigated that?
I've been joining team meetings periodically, whether it's a standing meeting that exists, or I've been saying to leaders, who do I need to check in with, and checking in with those people and scheduling time, and also ensuring that I'm participating vocal in any opportunity that we have for connection and social time, which can be really difficult in this environment, but ensuring that I'm showing up in the ways that people need me to. And also checking in with new employees at certain intervals, obviously 30 days, 90 days, that sort of stuff.
Right. And I'm sure that that is a big part of managing that balancing act at a company of Entrada size. You mentioned it was about, 28, 30 employees. You are, managing a lot of those change of addresses and a lot of those tactical things, but, you're also positioning the people team as a strategic partner, and you're thinking, you're planning long term, and you're building out this larger vision while you're also very much in the weeds. And so I'm sure joining those team meetings and being at the core of a lot of those larger strategic conversations across all teams puts you in a good position to play that role.
It's a great privilege of joining a company at this size, in my opinion. We're about to be 50, just to correct, we're about to cross over the 50 employee mark, which is sort of exciting. But it's a great privilege to be able to do all of that, right? And you understand why people have such ownership over things that they build at this stage, because they've literally been a part of every aspect of it. So it becomes your baby.
Totally, totally. And so, you're close to 50 employees now. And so I'm curious, how have you approached career growth and learning and development, especially at some of these, smaller companies and also biotech companies? I'm sure a lot of, your employees hold graduate degrees, more specialized education. They work on very specific types of projects. So how do you think about learning and development and career growth for those employees?
Yeah. So specifically at Entrada, or well, there's one part in biotech that I've seen is that overall it's a highly educated workforce, right? PhDs are very common, and so there's an appreciation for knowledge and for learning that is inherent in that you get to capitalize on, which is really great. So I have found overall the eagerness and the desire to learn and grow is there. What always gets in the way is competing priorities when you're building a business, right? And so one of the things that I've really seen work is, it used to be have it and people will go to it, right? And then it was this whole menu philosophy of like grab and go. And now people just need it built in. They need it built in as part of everything that you're doing. And people don't have time for it. So you have to provide it in small chunks in meaningful ways that align to where you are in the business and what's relevant, right? So if you're asking somebody to do something as part of your business cycle or as part of the year, you better couple that with a learning opportunity for them to do it well, right? So it's providing it fast, easy, just in time, and also in a manageable way for anyone to get it, digest it, and apply it, which is no small feat. Learning is, for a lot of people, it takes time and effort. But I'm constantly amazed by sort of younger generations, and number one, their thirst for knowledge and information, but also their ability to take what they learn and apply. So I find myself very encouraged by what I'm seeing in my environment. It's just making the time.
Right, right. How do you, especially in such sort of specialized roles, how do you balance the, domain specific knowledge that they're leveraging on a daily basis with a lot of the leadership and more sort of soft skills type of L&D programs as you build that out?
So we don't have to worry about the sort of technical side of things, because in the space that we are, they're trying to create and do work that's never been done before. So it's this, all of them are on squirrely missions to like learn and know more and to share that. And that's where it comes into culture, right? Creating forums for that information to be shared readily, willingly, and putting up people and recognizing people who do that well, right? That watching others do that helps you learn how to do it yourself. And then that just becomes part of the norm and the grease that fuels your culture. And so we see that a lot in the scientific space. So the other piece is really the L&D and the soft skill piece, which, God, that's a term. When will that term go away? I don't know. We can't come up with a better one. But because it's such an important, and soft just makes it seem less important. So that's why I've always had umbrage with the word. But when I think about how to do that in our space, I'm still in a little bit of assessment mode, right? And I'll tell you why. I'm going to do a little bit of a non sequitur and sort of come back. But so joining an organization, you have end of year activities, right? And so you have performance conversations, you have goal attainment conversations, right? And so I'm right now, I'm figuring out what is our management skill level right now in having those conversations, right? And also, what is people's ability to adopt what I'm creating? And how do I create stuff that's fair, right? Because everyone wants to put their stamp on things and join an organization and say, oh, we're going to do pay for performance. My main thing is, okay, we can't hold people to expectations that we have not laid out initially, right? So how do we move in? How do we have growth conversations that are helpful, developmental, but also fair, right? And so part of what I'm doing right now is assessing where we fall on that leadership spectrum. How are our managers able to show up for their employees and conduct those conversations? And then I think it'll help me be a little bit more targeted about where to start in the new year. But I'm talking to a few vendors right now about, like everyone is, virtual opportunities that are small, timely, and people can pull as they need to on their commutes or during lunch.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. You talked a little bit earlier too about taking those small, timely pieces and coupling them or pairing them with other necessary functions or operations that, everybody needs to take part in with the business. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. Like, do you have specific examples or experience kind of coupling those two things together? What did they look like? Because I think that's a really interesting idea.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, it makes sense, right? We have certain things that we do within HR and with any business at certain points in the year. So aligning your learning activities with it. So an example would be budgets, right? A very exciting example, but everyone has to create a budget, right? Within budget season to like build your forecast, right? And most people come from organizations and have different mental models of what that is, right? So how do we help people understand what are the components of a good budget? How do you go about building one? And then also, what are our frameworks within our organization that are important, right? And I think just maybe a little bit of time up front that we could spend building that just eliminates a lot of pain, probably for our finance team or for other things. Another example would be performance, obviously. I've always had this dream idea, and maybe I'll do it at Entrada, of doing quarterly conversations where there's a different focus. So there's always core questions that are asked that are part of your check-in, right? That are related to goals. But then there's always a wrapper around that conversation that, let's say at the beginning of the year, it's career growth. So you do some sort of career journey with the employee, right? You map out somebody's career and then you talk them through where they would want to go. And I think if you could build out a calendar like that throughout the year for not only business activities, but your people activities, I think we'd be better off. And then it just becomes part of the overall cadence of the year.
Oh, totally. Yeah, I think that's a great idea because I think a lot of times you have these generalized programs around how to give and receive feedback and how to, have a tough conversation. And I feel like what ends up happening is you go through that maybe once a year, twice a year. And if there's, let's say, like 100% of understanding that you can get, you're really only ever tapping into like that first 20%. And then you sort of reset and you get back in there, but really focusing on one specific area and then having the opportunity to action on it, I think makes it a lot more sticky and a lot more applicable very quickly. So you're like,
And you're targeted, right? So you're not looking at this massive menu of things that you have to learn or pay attention to at all times. You're focused and you're targeted on a certain area. So it just becomes less overwhelming and more achievable.
right. Yeah, makes sense. Similarly too, so we talked a little about career development. When you think of employee engagement, how has your approach in building morale and cultivating a strong culture differed across your experiences, given the variety of industries you've worked at? Does it look a little bit different in, your sort of experience in the biotech industry versus in, the tech industry, the healthcare industry, or are there just some core tenets that you've really built upon, that are universal?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I think there's such a focus in our world on culture, understandably so. And I don't view HR as the creators of culture. I view HR as the stewards. We are responsible for making sure that we're reinforcing what's good and we're paying attention to what we want to shift and what we want to change, right? So the first part is really understanding what culture you're walking into, right? That's a huge part. And what aspects of it that people are really proud of or are protective over. And then, I think the core tenet is ownership, not my ownership, but company ownership, right? And that is for every individual at any level within an organization. And so when I try to do things now, it is always, well, here are the tools, right? Here are the things. What would you do with it, right? And I think about it with my own kids. If I were to sit with my kids when they were little and give them a couple tubs of Play-Doh and maybe some sort of device or apparatus for them to play with. If I tried to tell them what to do with that rolling pin and the Play-Doh, they didn't want to hear it from me. You know what I mean? They wanted to take the Play-Doh and they wanted to make what they wanted to make. And I think that is the exact thing that happens in organizations. People don't want me to tell them what to do with the Play-Doh. They want to make something that feels like theirs and that they own. And so that at its core is really what I believe. And and human connection is key. So anytime you can get really personal or individual, whether that's a handwritten note, getting people into the homes, and I don't mean me physically, but like sending things home that are helpful, that alleviate, that think beyond just the work system, right? Because you talked about this earlier, everybody goes to work. Where you work is really important, right? You spend a colossal amount of time there, but that ripples into every other aspect of your life, right? So if we know that core piece of your job is stressful right now, we know that there's a ripple effect. So how do we impact the place where it's rippling out? And I think God, if we've seen that, it's been with COVID, right? I mean, there's never been, or at least in my time of HR, such a rally cry within our field around what are you doing? How are you supporting people? How are people making it work? So yeah, those are my core tenets.
Yeah, I love the Play-Doh analogy because, it's also what makes our jobs fun. If we, we're able to come into every company and we have like these are the 10 things we want to build here versus just sort of see what organically forms. I think that's honestly what makes it fun is that unique difference every single time. I think the other thing too is I think that approach is what enables you to show up as a partner rather than, as somebody that's coming in. It's a lot harder to build trust and that safety in that relationship with other employees when you come in with a very sort of predetermined idea of what needs to be built, especially as you're learning an organization. So, yeah. You talked a little bit about COVID and, obviously that's sort of changed the way that all of us have, been working. When you think of the future of work, especially in the biotech industry, in the medical industry that is traditionally, in person, do you feel like the need for distributed work through the pandemic has created a longer term shift and that the adoption of virtual work and technology may last or have ripple effects in the longer term in an industry where, that wasn't as much as visible in the past?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's broken. It's like the barn doors have been kicked open. And some of these long held arguments of, well, we can't do that virtually, right? Or your people are not as productive. Those arguments don't stand anymore, right? It's been proven. I think there are a couple things that really impacted this whole exercise in that in most companies it was the flick of a switch, right? So everyone went remote at the same time, right? Which from a change management perspective, there's an important element of that. Everyone was experiencing something at the same time, right? So there was that shared experience. I think people are moving, which is also, really interesting. People are moving to Vermont. People are moving to Maine. You know, people are moving away from two places where they can't commute into an office anymore, right? And I think people, if there's been one thing that COVID has done for humans is disrupt this idea that you can plan for so much, right? I think people are starting to say, what makes me happy? Where do I want to be? And I'll deal with the rest later. Maybe not everyone is saying that, but I think that we're going to see a major shift happen in workplaces in that people, you're no longer going to make the argument if there's a skill set that you need or there's talent that you need and they are in Vermont or they are in Maine and they are who you want and they are the right cultural add for your organization, you're going to have them join, right? As long as they can do their job from wherever that location is, right? The job responsibilities, sort of are can be met virtually. So I think there's a lot that's going to happen as a result of this across the country. Work is going to shift dramatically. I think we're going to be shifting our financial models. We're no longer going to be spending that money on space in the same way that we did. So we're going to be able to, my hope is that we're going to be able to take care of employees differently and in new and better ways and give them more freedom to live life as they want to. The other thing that I hope is that it disrupts this archaic, like 9 to 5 workday that we've been holding forever since industrial times. It doesn't make sense. I don't think we need to work 40 hours. I think you do your job in the amount of time that you need to and when you need to. There are other ramifications, obviously, of that with boundaries and otherwise, but which we're seeing as part of COVID too.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that last point that you were talking about and how, a lot of us have been enjoying remote work. And when I think about it, it's not necessarily like the remote work as much as it is the flexibility. Like that's what's been nice is, if I want to take a walk in the middle of the day and log in later at night, like it's all just really one and the same. And so I think that flexibility is the huge benefit, especially right now that I think will continue to adapt in the future.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. I do think that the lack of transitions personally has been the most detrimental for me. I used to really enjoy the walk home from work because I could listen to a podcast. I could let go of the day. Now my walk home is like a flight of stairs and I have a child going, "What's for dinner?" And it's jarring. It's jarring,
It
you
is,
know?
it is, it is, it is. I've started actually walking before work, even if it's just like whatever my commute would have been. I've been walking at the beginning of the day during lunch, even though I'm making my lunch at home and not going out and getting it. And at the end, it's not a lot, but like it at least gives me, like you said, that commute where I'm like listening to music or a podcast or something to transition into, okay, now I'm, working and now I'm done working and I'm at home. So, that's sort of been one of my strategies. But you talked a lot about change and that being, obviously one of the most constant pieces of 2020 and really any year. And so, what are some of the strategies that you've employed in the past as, a change management consultant and someone that is always sort of coaching an organization through change? What has worked really well for you and what guidance do you have for other HR leaders that are, supporting their employees through probably the most changes we've ever experienced in a year?
Yeah, I think I struggle with my answer because I think that there's a caveat to it. So I'll just start. I think one of the most meaningful graphs is, thinking about change adoption, and you always have that small percentage that digs their heels in. You have the largest percentage that usually can be swayed one way or another, and then you have the small percentage that's an early adopter. And I think everyone tends to focus on the people who are digging their heels in, right? And so if I were to be talking to anybody about focus on the people that you can move the quickest, right? What is it because usually it's just like one or two barriers that you just have to sort of dig in on and help them move through so that they can get what they need to feel like they can adopt to whatever the change is. And when you focus on those who are digging their heels in, it's just a lot of effort for not a lot of movement. And there's inertia that also happens with change. So the more people you have going towards the direction that you want them to go, the more people follow, right? The caveat is I think that there's a lot of people who are in a world of pain for whatever reason as a result of this. And so I don't want to paint that dig your heels in group with the brush of hardship, right? I think it's important to make sure that we're doing what we can to support people from a mental health perspective. I think in some cases, for instance, where I live, our schools never opened. So there are people who are home with their kids. And if there are unique needs, neurodivergent kids at home that have been for the past 9 months, that house needs some support, you know? And they ain't got time for whatever HR is pushing out from their organization. They need help in a real, meaningful, human way. And so making sure that you're supporting people's unique and individual needs, and then as it relates to change in the organization, you're separating that.
Yeah, yeah. I think part of what, you're even saying there really shows the importance of the people function having that awareness around what the business is looking to achieve, because really in order to be that strong advocate and to be able to step in and say, hey, like, I don't know if everyone is in a place where we can tackle this right now or we can tackle that right now. You really do need to have that larger understanding of what is being accomplished to know where there is that push and pull. Otherwise, you're in a world where you want to help, but you're not really sure where you can pull and push back unless it's something on the HR umbrella, which is like performance reviews or something.
Yeah, yeah, and I think underneath what you're saying too is really making sure you're pointing out other people's blind spots and also continuing to like search for where yours are, right? Because there's so much about my situation that is extremely privileged, right? And there's a myriad of things I'm not thinking about when it comes to people's situations. And so ensuring that I'm continuing to do the work myself to understand what's happening for people, and so we can make sure that we're supporting them.
Nice. Well, I have one last question for you. This has been super enlightening so far. One last question is, you sort of think about all of your experiences. You've been in so many different types of companies and so many different stages. What's your advice to aspiring people and talent professionals? What's like one or two things that you've really picked up along the way that you continue to leverage in your day-to-day as, ahead of people?
Yeah. It sounds so cliche, but the power of your network, right? And nurturing that. And I think it's become pretty easy now to do, right? Because of social media, it has become blander in that regard, right? But making sure that you are tending to people's career journeys, to staying on top of what other people are doing. And I mean that so all of my opportunities, with the exception of this one, have come through my network, meaning I worked with somebody in a different capacity. I was on a board with somebody and they introduced me to somebody. So ensuring that you're keeping your circles alive. You don't have to have many of them. Be deliberate about them, be intentional about them, make sure that they fill you up and that it's genuine. And that also, if your guiding post is that you want to be connected to the people because you like the people and you appreciate the people and you want them in your life, then it will become easier to stay in touch and to nurture them, right? And so ensuring that you're doing that, and also, putting yourself out there, right? I think that's one of the hardest things to do. But if you're avoiding being embarrassed or you're avoiding trying to do something because you're not sure you know how, that's exactly the thing you need to be doing, right? And so constantly jumping in feet first has been the thing that has gotten me where I am, taking risks. Some of those risks, maybe I wish I thought through a little bit more, right? But not being afraid, I think, is one of the key things, which sometimes for a lot of people, that's hard. I always think you got to have a visual for yourself, right? For some people, think of yourself like swinging a bat, right? Just like let it go, or picture yourself. You have to have I'm a visual person, so I have to have something that I can conjure up in my mind that helps me get over the hump.
Right. Yeah. No, that's good advice. I mean, I think especially in the startup industry, your network is so important because we typically work on really small teams. So I might have like 2 or 3 people, on a daily basis that I talk to that is also as entrenched in the sort of people and talent world as I am. And so it really helps to have that network to lean on, especially times like this. I find myself leaning on my network more than ever because, we're all kind of navigating such a very different time. So I think that's great. And then to your point on taking risks, I think that's the nature of the startup world. Like, we're all solving problems we've never solved before. And so it's good to build that practice and build that muscle of diving right in because, like it or not, you're going to be doing it and you're going to learn something. And so I think that's great advice. Well, Kerry, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's always so great catching up with you and hearing what you've been up to. And I really appreciate the time and, you for sharing your story and your experiences. This is fun.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, it was a pleasure to be here.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast and want to hear more stories like this, please subscribe for the weekly drop and feel free to share around with your people and talent colleagues. I'd love your feedback, so please leave a review and let us know what you enjoyed and what types of topics you'd like to see covered in the future. The more reviews and subscribers we get, the more quality content we can consistently deliver to you. If you're interested in being on the podcast, feel free to reach out to me at russica@engageandempower.org. See you next week.